Thank you guys so much for coming today. I've got a really exciting topic, something I'm very passionate about that I want to share with you guys. I'm sure that everyone here is very familiar with photography and taking photos, and some of you may be familiar with shooting video as well, and shooting video with DSLRs, which is a very exciting development in in camera technology, and something that has completely changed my profession. And I also think just changed the way that people deal with cameras and deal with photography. So just a quick overview. I'm just going to just introduce myself a little bit, and then talk about this film that I was fortunate enough to work on and be the cameraman on. And then we'll take a look at the film, and then kind of go through the making of the film and shooting with DSLRs, and sort of how to kind of move in terms of thinking from photography and working with photography and digital photography to thinking and working about making films and shooting digital films, and the differences that go along with that. There's a lot of things that are the same, and there's a lot of things that are very different. And kind of, I'm sure there's a lot of different levels out there. Some of you may be familiar with Pentax equipment. Some of you may be familiar with other equipment. Some of you may just be interested in becoming familiar with some equipment. I'm the most familiar with the Pentax camera, so I will definitely be able to help with any questions about that. But I think that overall, just really talking about production techniques is kind of where I'd like to kind of keep it. As we go along, I would love for questions to come from the audience, but if we can, just definitely just we'll keep it on topic. I'm going to hit kind of the topics taking you through from pre-production to post-production to what you do when you have a movie and you want to show it to people. So if you have a question, that's great. If it's a question about something we haven't talked about yet, I'm sure it's coming up, so we can talk about it then. And at the end, if we've missed any topics, we'll take all questions at that point. So these are just some production stills of us. The most fun thing I think you can do in the world is work on a film. And the fact that now that's an opportunity that is, it's not just for Hollywood people, it's for anyone who can get a hold of a camera, is a fantastic thing. So these are just some production stills from the making of Uncle Jack. And I'm just going to go into the presentation first. Where do we go? Great. So just a little bit about myself. I was always interested in photography, and I never imagined that a person could have a job in filmmaking until I just had the opportunity to stumble on a set one day. A friend took me there, and I was absolutely, from the moment I walked on, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I went to film school at the University of Colorado, and we really started out in a way, it was much an art school. We shot with Bolexes. We learned how to splice film. It was very old school, and it was interesting kind of coming up with that right at the advent of digital filmmaking. And I started my company about 3 years ago, and it's just this the change that's happened in the past few years is just phenomenal. I started my career as a slate guy, as a film loader. These are jobs that are almost extinct at this point, but it's an exciting thing. And I think my first interaction with Pentax was I think 2.5 years ago. We were hired to make some documentaries about photographers who use Pentax equipment. And that was our first contact. And the very interesting thing about that is that at that point, we had a film crew, we had our video cameras, we had our sound equipment, and the photographers were on the other side. We were pointing our lenses at them, and they had their digital cameras, and they were taking pictures. And from that moment, 2.5 years ago, like those two worlds are collided, and now it's a complete gray area. It's where does the video crew end, and where does the still photographer pick up? Those lines are so blurred, I think, as to go away. Now we're using the same cameras that we were documenting to make films. So I just think it's a really interesting time for both photography and videography. And it's really, as much as people like to wax about the old days, to me it's the most exciting time. And the most exciting thing is that now all this stuff is just available to whoever wants it. So I'm just going to tell you, Uncle Jack is kind of one of the reasons why I'm here. It was my first experience working with the DSLR as a real filmmaking tool. And how it came about was Pentax approached us. They had just had this new camera the K-7, and they were really proud of its video features, and for good reason. And they really just wanted to see what would happen if they just put this in the hands of some filmmakers and really just sort of like let us do whatever we wanted. So as like a filmmaker and a person who owns a production company, it's absolutely like that's the offer you can't refuse. They're like, take our camera, do whatever you want, make a movie. You know, they completely trusted us. And so in my company, we have a director named Jamin Winans, and he had just produced a couple of incredible feature films, most notably Ink. If you guys do a quick plug for him, but if you check out Ink online, you'll see like a most amazing trailer, and one of the most creative minds I've had the pleasure to work with. So we kind of like put it out there to people in the company to see who had a script that would work. And Jamin had this script for Uncle Jack, and it was absolutely, it was both the highs and lows when you read a script. It was one of the most, I think, really creative, clever short films I'd read, and also one of the most ambitious to try and do. It was mostly shot at night, had action sequences, car chases, explosions, people hanging off buildings, all these things that on a really tight budget you really should stay away from. It didn't have any animals, but other than that, it had like every nightmare. It had children, all that stuff. But everyone fell in love with it, and it seemed like a natural, like something that ambitious is something that when you're taking this kind of new camera technology, it's just a good match. I mean, these cameras they're rugged. They come in sizes that you can put anywhere. They just as much as it was a daunting script, I think it really like matched up with where we think that filmmaking is going, particularly with small handheld cameras and what you can do. So we went about and started to test it, and really went about knowing that we were going to push the limits of this camera. Everything from shooting at night to putting it in like the most uncomfortable and trying places, and even so that we asked for a second camera just in case we broke the first one. Luckily though, no one was hurt making the film, and no cameras were hurt either. So without further ado, I'm going to plug in the audio and let you guys take a look at the film.
Break! Get out of there! Abort the plan! Dogs on the hunt! I'm riding hot! Repeat! I'm riding hot!
Uncle Jack?
Hey! Pooh Bear! What are you doing up?
Can't sleep. I was wondering if you could tell me a story.
Wow. Yeah, it's kind of a bad time there, Peapod. I got a lot of work to do late in the office here.
My parents are fighting again. You said I could call you when that happened.
All right, quick story. There was this heroic prince, and there was this beautiful princess who took some magic pills.
Magic pills! Cool.
And the prince and the princess had to flee the kingdom because the evil duke was trying to kill them.
Really? Why?
Well, the prince had taken a significant loan from the evil duke, but the duke insisted on charging interest at a per annum rate of 56%, which is just ridiculous.
What's happening?
The prince had to borrow a horse from the king's joker.
I've been shot!
The horse broke his leg and died.
He died?
The prince fled into the woods, chased by the duke's archers.
We're gonna die!
Wait, what about the princess? Magic pills!
They faced a huge flying dragon, and they rode the dragon out of the kingdom.
They crawl through the cave of enchanted souls.
He's given 3 tests to character. The first was strength.
Do we wizard cast a terrible, terrible spell on the king's joker.
Watch the lighter.
The spell of fire ignited the 17th Street explosion! They hung over the pit of bottomless despair and sadness!
Please, make sure someone feeds my cats! Canned. Not the dry stuff. Not the dry stuff.
What happens then?
I can't quite remember, Peapod. You know, the prince and the Joker were cornered.
I have
because
a name.
The prince was an idiot. He was just a stupid idiot. He was addicted to gambling, he drank too much, he ran a failed carpet cleaning business, and he lived happily ever after in a far-off land.
I know how the story ends.
That's nice, sweetheart.
The prince is trapped in the castle of Skulls and Bones, right? That's when the prince uses his legs to signal the purple troll monster. The purple troll monster then attacks and unlocks the rolling catapult. The lady who lives in the shoe calls the knight in shining armor, and he saves the day.
So, that happened.
That's it. That was the end of the story. How'd you know that? Peapod?
Good night, Uncle Jack.
Good night.
No more gambling.
Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate you guys watching that film. I hope you. Sounds like everyone enjoyed it. I think you can see what I was talking about when it was ambitious to produce. Just really a handful of us for a film crew. Usually about like 10 people on set. We kind of asked for a lot of favors, which if you get into the filmmaking game, I think you'll learn about pretty quickly. So just kind of want to go through the making of the film. I think one of the first things, and I find to be most striking about the viewing experience is how many really cool angles like we were able to get, and part of that I think was very natural with the way that the DSLRs are. They're, you know, I mean, if you think of like of a Hollywood camera, when you look at behind the scenes on a film, I mean they're huge, and they're, you know, becoming smaller, but I don't know if they're ever going to get quite as small as this. And with this camera, it really opened up a whole bunch of ideas. And as we workshopped the script, we really were, you know, excited about the possibilities where we could put it. If you notice, there's shots where we actually put the camera like on a sandbag right by his foot when he's hitting the brakes. You know, putting the camera like right by the gun to get like the close up of him loading the gun. We rigged the camera on the back of the car. One of my favorite shots was actually kind of featured in this still here. We really wanted to find an angle which, you know, showed some dynamic movement. Really, I mean, we got the car going pretty fast, but you know, never quite as fast as you want in like a chase scene. So we wanted to like add some additional movement to the camera. And one of the things that this opened up was we're like, well, let's put it on the steering wheel. So literally, we taped the camera to the steering wheel, and we put like a fake steering wheel made out of what we call a French flag, but just basically just a piece of black plastic where his hand is in front, and just taped that up. And since there's no real light on it, you can't really see the steering wheel. So he's driving with his hand on the bottom and holding the French flag, and the camera is like literally stuck to the steering wheel. And it was one of those shots where we thought it would be cool for maybe, you know, 1 or 2 cutaways, but really like it was, you know, able to tell the story in such a unique way that we really used it almost as our primary shot throughout that the driving scene, which was one of the hardest scenes to shoot. And so for the driving scene, we shot that in two very different ways. One is practically, which means simply that the car was just driving down the street, and we would, every different lap, we would essentially, move the camera around the car to capture the different shots that we wanted from our storyboards. But there was so much dialogue that we needed a second way to do that, and so what we did was we put the car on a green screen at a local stage. So we had the car in front of it, like a large green screen, and then the car behind them was essentially on the kind of dollies that you would kind of use to go under and change the oil or something. So we put the front wheels of that on that and had guys just moving it back and forth with ropes just to get a little bit of a sense of motion. And then we shot the scene from the front using a handheld camera with just a small brace, basically, just to put it on your shoulder, give it a bit more of the feel of a bigger camera and hold it steady, but just that camera just on the front, and that's kind of what got the motion there. And then we'd taken the camera out previously and shot some plate shots just out of the back of my pickup truck, and then using the green screen, if you guys are familiar with that technique, essentially we replaced those shots so you can see the trees and kind of buildings and stuff go by. And I think one of the things that it seemed like this huge daunting task, and there was a lot of technical steps to getting that done. But really, to me, it's the motion of the camera that really sells it and makes it feel like you're in the scene. It's that energy. So that was a really exciting scene, particularly in terms of the lighting. Most of this we shot on the streets of Denver, and we wanted to use as small as instruments as possible. This is why I brought this light in, not knowing that the B&H actually has 3 of them hanging in the ceiling. But this light was one of the prime lights that we used to shoot the film, and also this style of light. And it's a very, very new, exciting kind of light. They use very little power, and they're very portable. And you can also get these, I didn't bring one in today, but the size that fits in the hot shoe of the camera. It just sits up there. And in fact, those style lights, the smaller ones, just running off AA batteries, was how we lit the car scene. Basically, I just took some tape and stuck these battery-powered lights up everywhere where you couldn't see them, including the young lady in the back. We just had one in her lap, just kind of, and just because they're not a whole lot of illumination, but enough for a very light-sensitive camera like the Pentax. They were able to to light those, and you're still able to read all the street lights in the background. So yeah, these are really cool lights. And this runs on a battery as well. So when we would go out in the streets, we would just take these lights out and use, maybe this would be our biggest light back here. We can play with all this stuff and the cameras that Carolyn has brought in from Pentax, at the end. So the other thing that's important in the lighting, and again, if you guys have any questions on these topics, please definitely let me know as we kind of move through these things. But one of the important things about lighting for a film, I'll just get this, then I'll get you guys. It was how do you match the lighting in the studio to the stuff that we actually got outside? And essentially what we did was we went around and shot the lights just with our test footage, the lights that are in the streets, and the street lights, and they all have a little interesting hue. They're either orange, sometimes they're magenta. And the street lights in Denver are very orange, but they also have a hint of green in them. So we just basically took some orange gel and a little bit of green gel. It's stuff at film production houses, or I'm sure even here that you can get, and we just matched it by eye until we found the lighting on the stage that matched the stuff on the streets. And the lights on the stage we just had on stands just like this. And then just had our assistants just twirl them on and off, and that, in addition to the camera motion, is one of the things that sells the idea of kind of moving through the streets. So just on the lighting, do you guys have a question?
I actually want to go back to the rigging.
Yes.
I was just curious about the shot when they leave the car and they're on the street running.
Yes.
Was that do these cameras have
Cool. And I've been told to repeat the question, so I'm going to try it. So the question is how did you keep the camera steady as you're moving through the street? There's a few different ways that we can do it, and one of the things I think that is really like important is that you don't have to be really too perfect. You know, when you're filmmaking, there's a lot of leeway that that an audience is willing to give you if you're interested in the film or things are consistent. So we did use sort of a kind of close to a Steadicam, but essentially it's just like a if you can imagine a Steadicam without like a whole lot of the rig and just like on a pole, and because the cameras are so light, that you're able just to do that, and really like the motion side to side and back and forth is really pretty acceptable to an audience. You just have to be really careful about like that tilt. And so if your horizon stays relatively straight, then it's really like the viewer doesn't seem to mind like as much kind of motion. So on the shots that we're running, and another thing is that sort of every shot is slightly different in terms of like how you're rigging and the best way to go about it. And I think that's one of the cool things. I mean, when you're shooting it, you obviously have like the time to make the determination of what's the best. And then when those are all kind of come together from like slightly different techniques, then I think it's really exciting for the viewer. But it's also kind of hard to figure out which one is which because there's so many different ones. So I'll just talk about a few from them. The shots that look like Steadicam, just like really just it's just like a pole, like almost like a monopod that's weighted on the bottom. Now that's something that if you have a monopod or even a tripod and you add some sort of weight to the bottom, that you can really get that effect. It gives you a sore arm, but you get some great shots. The one shot where he's running and the camera is in front of him looking back, and there's an explosion behind him, that is actually, we got like one of the cheapest, like most lightweight tripods that we could find, and literally just strapped it to his waist. And again, it just goes back to like, if you had to do that on a Hollywood film, you'd have like a 50-pound camera in front. It would take all this equipment. I can imagine. I saw how they did the scene from Big Fish. And they like had the guy carries the guy down to the pond. And they had to have a crane to carry him down there. But with these cameras, it's just like a roll of tape and an old tripod, and you're good to go. And I think the roll of tape is actually not only maybe the key production tool, but also sort of like emblematic of this style of filmmaking. And if any of you guys saw just the sort of making of behind the scenes stills, as you notice, there's an awful lot of tape like involved. And really, it kind of came down to if you didn't have like the right piece of gear, well, maybe we can get it done with tape. And so you tape on the steering wheel. We like tape the car up in the dash. Tape the camera up in the dashboard. We like taped it to people. Everywhere where you looked, there was tape. So I'm going to go ahead and say it's like if you have a roll of tape and a DSLR like the Pentax, like you're basically good to go. I mean, you can. You have someone, I don't know, if you can convince one of your friends to tape it on their head, you're going to get a great point of view camera. So that was some of the rigs. Some of the rigs I think I'll just point out is we did have a really small jib on the set, and that's how we got some of the overhead shots of the car and also of the wonderful young actress in her room. There's the shot kind of like coming down on her. It's a shot that Jamin really likes as a director, and I really agree with it as a technique of just kind of giving this sort of overhead look and this nice float. And really, again, just because of the weight of the camera, we were able to do that with a really inexpensive piece of equipment. It's basically like a homemade jib. It just fits on a tripod, and we would you'd set the camera and just sort of like approximate it with a wide lens of where you want to go, and then just start it rolling, and then just move it from side to side, and then bring it back, and we'd all like look over to see if we got the shot. And after like a little bit of practice, and mostly because we're using the wide lens, we were able to get like loads of interesting shots. Yes, sir.
Speaking of wide lens, were you using a prime lens, or were you using
We were actually using the DA. It's like a 10 to 15, 10 to 17. Yeah, the fisheye. And you'll notice that it was one of our favorite lenses. Yeah, we were in a position where, because of the speed that we needed to shoot to kind of get this done in the nights that we had, the zoom lenses were just, you know, that they were that much quicker for us to work with. You know, prime lenses like have their own advantages that are often a little bit faster, which is great. And when we start talking about focus later, you know, there's often they're a little bit easier to kind of focus and deal with. But for us, like the biggest thing was just moving quickly. We had just had so much to cover in really just a few nights of working. So for us, just having like that zoom lens right there, you know, if it was super wide, we went with the 10 to 17. We had like a medium-sized lens, which is a DA star. It was the 16 to 50 that was on there for most of kind of like the sort of speaking, like kind of typical shots. And then we had a lens, another DA star. I think it was went to like 250, 16 to 250. Yeah, all fantastic. And I mean, just sort of another side note, but we're coming from you know, like low budget filmmaking and like sort of the video background. You know, forever we've used, you know, great video cameras, but it's just like you have the wide and the tight, and you know, no matter which ones, it was just always sort of like you had the same lens, and you could put a wide angle adapter on it, and that was fine. But really, like, you know, just missed like having lens options and how just different lenses look differently. I mean, and so, you know, moving to the DSLR as like a filmmaking tool has just like reopened that world of like you can have all these different lens choices. And the Pentax, of course, like has, you know, just, I mean, like loads of lenses, which is great. Cool. So I mean, like rigging the camera and camera movement, you know, I think absolutely like one of the most exciting parts. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about the kind of camera movement in a little bit. Yes, sir. What's, pardon?
How long it take does the camera movement?
This camera is actually doesn't have. The question was like how long it'll take will the camera permit? 30 minutes. Yeah, I was the reason I'm stalling is because that we did not. That's one thing we did not have a problem with. I know some of the other DSLRs will shut off, but you know, this one it goes to 30 minutes. It's one of those things. I think particularly from the filmmaking point of view is that we never really had to take more than like 5 or 6 minutes that we went. Some of our plate shots, which are the shots that we use to replace the backgrounds on the green screen, went a little bit longer, but we never had a problem. I will say that just on a technical note, and this is for all DSLRs, that a lot of people have problems with you know, like a short take, and that's something that when we first started testing the Pentax, there was an issue. Like you'll start rolling, and even like after a minute or a few minutes, it will stop rolling. And what fixed it for the Pentax, I would say like 9 times out of 10 across the board with DSLRs, is it just means that the card that you're using is too slow. And so you just really need to get, you know, as fast an SD card or a compact flash card as you can, because that is the #1 problem. And you know, it's in the camera buffering. But once we got a faster card in this camera, then you know, we had no problems. Yes, sir.
Some other external storage directly?
You can. There's a bunch of new devices that are coming out with new external storage, and they're still a little bit quirky. The one I'm familiar with is called a Nano Flash. And essentially, it's like a digital Walkman that records whatever HD stream you come into a pretty robust codec. So like a really editable one. One of the things I'll say, that as you move into different applications for the camera, that's something that may be very, very useful. But typically, and for this film and filmmaking like it, you just want to keep things as simple as possible. And so recording directly to the card was absolutely, it worked fine for us. And even though there's a lot of talk about how you know, how sophisticated the codec and the compression is, you know, this was able to stand up to all this green screen work. We really put it through the paces, and it worked really well. Yes, in the back. This light, this is a light panel. Yeah. Yes, yes. First, I mean, these are light panels. There's a bunch of companies that make different LED lights. I would say that, I mean, really LEDs I think are the way of the future. They're dimmable, they're small, they don't put up a whole lot of heat, and I would say, and the ones that you can actually put on the camera are really, really affordable. There's one of the most interesting things, I think, moving from shooting stills to shooting video is in the lighting. You know, in natural light things are pretty similar. But you know, if you've ever used strobes, obviously we can't use strobes. So that's what I wanted to bring this in to kind of show you, like as an example of you know, kind of an option if you're using a flash or if you're kind of working in low light, and even just you know, just having one of these on top of your camera and just turning it up a very slight amount just to hit the eyes is often enough. And you'll find out that more often you'll overlight things. And one of the things that we wanted to do with Uncle Jack was really kind of keep, you know, make sure nothing looked lit in the car scenes. Really keep everything like nice, like low, and then just make the camera run as, you know, with as fast an aperture as possible. So just in terms of the green screen, I wouldn't recommend jumping right into the green screen work. It definitely takes a lot of work. But if you do want to go that way, it's one of those things where I really think, you know, just, you know, experimentation and practice makes perfect. And you can actually find a lot of explosions, gunshots, are things that you can actually find like online. And we sort of like, that's what was our starting point in terms of those things. And the worst case scenario, like I think the scene that you're talking about where there's the explosion behind him as he's running, and we weren't able to put a green screen in that shot, so that shot probably took longer than any other in the film, because literally we just, in the computer, we cut out a mat behind him as he was running, and it's called rotoscoping. Yes, in the back?
Yes.
Oh.
Exactly. What aperture did you use for a lot of the night scenes?
Typically, it was as fast as the lens went. Yeah, and in a couple of slides, I'm gonna kind of go over exactly like how we worked with this camera to lock in the exposure and to get those shots, and sort of talking about like working with DSLRs in that way. So I'm gonna get probably a little bit more on that topic in a bit. Yes.
You know, watching the film, I was thinking that, you know, there's clear advantages that are like sort of conventional wisdom at the moment in terms of making films with these cameras as opposed to shooting video cameras, you know, less so phone cameras. But,
Right.
you know, the advantages seem to be clearly, you know, the variation of the lenses, which gives you the depth of field that film cameras would traditionally give you. But in looking at the film, my sense is that it still looks like the sort of flatter feel of video as opposed to, you know, the more sophisticated, even consumer video cameras that allow you like frame pull downs, you know, the frame pull down which will simulate a film look. So I think that film was amazingly inventive, and in the sense is that you'd almost be dangerous if you had a thing that limits. The thing that I think is limiting is it still feels like video. It still has that sort of flat feeling of video as opposed to the richness of a you know, real full film digital pull down camera. Is there anything that people shooting those cameras are using to you know, create a richer depth of color? You know, some of it sometimes it feels. I mean, I think that's what makes the difference between amateur.
Well, I think that, you know, you can compare, you know, cameras, you know, kind of ad nauseum, and you know, in terms of my company and sort of my background, you know, we really shoot like a wide range of cameras, you know, depending on the project, and for me, you know, like I work a lot with the RED camera, for example, and in terms of digital cameras available today that are sort of shooting motion pictures, it's probably the, you know, the one that's really closest to kind of capturing like a true film look, and it's a wonderful camera, and we use it a lot. It shoots massive resolutions, and sometimes we need that. One of my latest projects was actually we shot a project for a billboard in Times Square. I just got to see it last night. It was really cool. It's in the Forever 21 building. They have an interactive billboard that shoots like a camera across the street, and then there's like models sort of like come in front and sort of interact with the crowd. They take pictures of the crowd. They like pick up people in the crowd. It's really cool. If you guys check it out, I was really proud of it, and I got to shoot the models, which was super fun. But that we needed huge files, like 2K resolution, and so we shot that with the Red, and it was wonderful. But I mean, one of the things I love about these cameras, it's just like there's no way I could have made a film like this, photographed a film with the Red. I would have needed 2 or 3 times the people. You know, I would have needed to like chop up a car to get it in the places that I wanted. You know, it exponentially would have made everything more expensive. And you know, there's a place for that in terms of filmmaking. But what this opened up, you know, in terms of no matter who's getting it, is it's so many of those things that I love about film, about being able to, you know, work the depth of field and to choose the lenses and to put it there. But the biggest thing is just the fact that you can do it. You know, it's so easy to be encumbered by the filmmaking process. And sometimes it's just, you know, that's like the worst thing about it. I mean, one of the wonderful things about photography is you can go out by yourself, take a picture, and that's a complete thought right there. You can share that. But film is not like that. Film is most often a collaboration, and all of a sudden you have an army of people that you need, and you need to feed them, and you need to keep them entertained. And then when you're done shooting it, you need to edit it, and then you sound mix it, and then show it. And so it's very easy to get sort of like too much stuff around you, when really if you want to make a film and keep it simple, this is what I really feel like this new age is going to and really opening up. So that's the main attraction to me. I do think too that, you know, a lot of the flatness and the dark that you kind of see in the less vivid colors was really an artistic choice that we had in terms of the mood, that we really, particularly like in the Flossie McGrew's, which is sort of where the story ends, that was like a really, really dark area and very difficult to light. So we were sort of, you know, kind of like by choice wanted to make it kind of moody. And I think that what you're seeing in terms of like less like saturated colors, if you were to kind of go outside in a more you know, naturally lit environment, I think you would see that like quite a bit more. Cool. Is there any other questions? I was going to speak a little bit about audio because I know that's something that like a lot of people probably don't have to or haven't had to deal with as much if you're coming from a still photography background. So the way that we recorded audio on this was to a small solid state recorder made by a company by M Audio. So what we call that is double system recording, and that goes back to the old film days when you had a film camera and the recording would be done on a separate device. And so that for me was a very like normal way to work. And I find it to be better. You don't have to deal as much with the you know, microphones on the camera. It lets me deal with the camera and lets the audio person deal with the audio. And we used a slate to sync things up, or if we didn't have a slate or it just wasn't you know, in the car or whatever, we would just simply use a hand clap like that. And then when you get your footage back in the edit system, you would just like link those together. There's a lot of things, like you can see this microphone here, which makes a huge difference to the DSLR in terms of like capturing natural sound. And it, you know, depending on how finicky you are, like it is, or how quiet the space is, it is, you know, good enough for like an interview, but really better for kind of capturing like natural sound, particularly like in the wildlife. I will say that across the board, coming from, you know, making like narrative films, that there's actually none of the DSLRs that I've worked with or tested is quite there with the audio function. If you're recording like dialogue, particularly in terms of this, so I would recommend if you are making a narrative film, you know, sort of like looking at maybe doing a double system recording like we did. Also, a lot of our film was recorded using a process called ADR, which is it's just common to sort of like bigger films, and just a way that Jamin likes to work. Typically in my filmmaking, when I'm by myself away from Jamin, I like to record everything on set. But because we're moving so fast, kind of between scene to scene, that most of this, we recorded audio, but we only use it as a reference track. And in the studio, and by studio I mean in our basement, we would re-record the audio with the actors, and you know, it's one of the things I think that they actually, you know, did an amazing job on. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it is something that that, you know, a little bit of practice or a lot of patience that you can do. And it's sort of a filmmaking technique that's used kind of throughout the motion pictures. I would just, as a side note, I would say that if you're looking to make a film, you know, really even like working in terms of a silent film with a voiceover or a music track is a great way, I think, to start. I think there's, you know, so many things, different aspects of filmmaking, you know, that you can focus on with a camera. It's sort of how I learned when we were in film school. You know, we were encouraged to sort of, you know, just kind of go out and just work on the visuals first, and then bring that in later, either with like a music track or something like that. But you know, if you're filmmakers, you're probably like, forget that. You know, I'm going to do it my way right from the start. So either way, you know, you can't go wrong. But it's definitely, audio is a little bit of a challenge. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the post-production kind of and how we did Uncle Jack, which is a pretty complicated post-production procedure, and it definitely, you know, doesn't have to be as complicated as this. But what we did was we took all the footage from the camera, and they come in as AVI files, and this actually the way that this camera compresses is actually really good, and it was an important thing for us as we did a lot of these kind of special effects shots. But all digital SLRs compress the footage, and they kind of end up in a way that's not great for editing systems. So like they compress in what they call like a long GOP or long GOP, which means a whole bunch of frames are compressed together. So it's hard to edit, because when you edit, you want to edit on a certain frame, and sometimes that's not as good. So we took all of this, and we used Apple systems, so we used a program called Compressor, and we changed them all into ProRes files, which are native to the Final Cut editing system. And not only that, is this camera shoots in 720p, which is HD format. We up-resed it to 1080p HD, and the reason that we did that, and it was really only for this reason, was because we had a lot of rotoscoping to do in like the scene that was pointed out a few minutes ago, where the gentleman's running and there's an explosion behind him. So we took it through into Final Cut that way, and did all the rough edit. We also use this step, and this camera shoots in 30 frames a second, and most video shoots in 29.97. And we knew we wanted to output it and sort of, you know, share it and put it on DVDs and stuff like that. So before we edited it, we used another application called Cinema Tools, which changed that. It's a simple step, but a necessary step to change that from 30 to 29.97 FPS. Then we brought it into the timeline and used either the slate or the hand clap to sync up the audio. And then we started editing. And then when we came to a special effects sequence, we took that sequence into a program called After Effects, and that's where we worked the green screen and the rotoscopes and added the explosions. And then from that, we had a complete film that was then re-recorded the audio, composed the music, did a pass of sound effects, did a pass of color correction, and then outputted to kind of what you saw today. Yes?
What was the breakdown from shooting time to post to further post? How long did it take?
The shooting time is always the quickest. And we had like a week or 2 weeks of just sort of like testing, you know, not really working every day, but meeting like every couple of days, going over the scripts, looking for locations, and also really workshopping. And I think one of the best and worst things about filmmaking is how collaborative it is. And the best part is you get to work with often a bunch of amazing people and either, you know, strengthen friendships or make new friends, occasionally lose a few friends, depending on how the film goes. And so like particularly in this film, you know, with it being so ambitious, we would sit around and think of new ways, you know, to make it interesting, think of ways that we could, you know, get a location for free or for cheap. You know, think of, we knew these stunt guys that were able to help us with some of the like moving the car, and we're like, you know, if we put these guys in the movie, I bet they'll do it for free. So the two kind of henchmen are actually the stunt coordinators as well, and then so they were responsible for like pulling back the car, and they also like, you know, did some of the car stunts, things like that, like driving. And I mean that's like the best part of it is like that collaboration, and the worst part of it is that you find that as a filmmaker you're often very reliant on other people to do it. And and that's the double-edged sword. But I think ultimately it's very rewarding. But specifically, how long it took, we had a week to 2 weeks of pre-pro. We shot like 3 kind of days, 2 of them kind of like late into the night, and then we had 1 day we had to go back to the last location because we hadn't the intricate skull flying off, hitting the knight in shining armor and falling down. Somehow that took longer than we had planned, so we had to go back in and shoot that like a pickup day. And then the post took a lot longer, but most of it was because we had like other jobs to do. I think it would have taken, if you like all hands on deck, probably about a week, maybe a week and a half. But that sort of stretched on really to 3 weeks, almost a month. But mostly it's just because kind of had to go make money, stuff like that. So the steps you do is you take the AVI files, and this is true of whatever. I would recommend this step for whatever camera you're using. You take the raw files from the camera, you bring them onto your computer. Also at this point, back them up, and really it's like you organize them as best you can. At this point, I'm not organized by nature, but through filmmaking and definitely in dealing with files, it's something that I really have learned to, because if you don't, you are totally screwed later in the edit process. So really, it's really important to keep these all really organized and also backed up. And then through compressor, or if you're working in there's probably a different file for if you're working on Avid or PCs or any of those systems. But compressor is the one we use. You move those to ProRes HQ, and then we upres them at the same time to 1080, which is that's not necessary, but moving it to an editable format is necessary. So whatever works best for your edit system, that you should move it to at that point. And then another important step is you can form it to 2997. And 2997, it seems just like a little decimal point, but 2997 is the way that most all video systems in the United States work. So that's something that you want to do that right off the bat as well. To 24p?
Why would you do 24?
What's that?
Why did you do it 24?
The reason we didn't, this camera right now, it only shoots in the 30, and since this was going to be primarily viewed like as a television piece, then I typically stick with 2997 if it's something that's going to television, and if it's something that's just going to live on the web, or it's going to something that's going back to film, then I use 24. Now that's just me and how I do it. That's because if you use 24 and you go to television, you have to make up those frames at some point. But other people definitely like to shoot 24, across the board. For me, it doesn't really matter, and it's as long as it's a progressive frame. That's the most important thing.
And last question.
Yeah.
Because I'm just seeing, you having to sit there and do a lot of rendering. You didn't have to do a lot of rendering, except when you're doing the matte, or a whole. Because you have to.
Yes, I like to. It's a question. So this is a process that takes a lot of time. Like sort of rendering your files to the ProRes. So I like to just do that. It's something that I usually will typically the night after the shoot, get home and then let the day's footage run overnight, and then usually by the next morning your computer's tired, but hopefully you're well rested. But it is such a tempting step to skip, and as you guys start working with these files, I think it's a really important one, because just down the road. If you've started editing already, and you're using the files, it's not great for your edit system. It's always right at the last minute that problems start to show themselves. Like when you're trying to do a color correction, or when there's just a frame is acting strangely, and that's because of it's a compressed frame. So all these things sort of you can start editing. You're like, oh, what is he talking about? This is easy. I can just put this right in iMovie and I'm off to work. But it's we're always at the last step. You're making a DVD. These problems sort of kind of rear their ugly head. So I would definitely, one of the most important things is you want to get these files into an editable, really stable format, right off the bat, and then start there your editing process.
And then you don't have to once it enters Final Cut, after you've done all that.
That's right. When you're editing, you won't have to do renders until you put effects on them. But even when you put effects or do compressions, because it's in a format that it works well with, render time is less. Yes. That's a good question. Yeah. Good. Right. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to that step, you can definitely get this onto a film. But to be honest, it's there's so many ways to show these things now. Even in film festivals, whereas a few years you had to get a film print, now it's like they would rather deal with a digital file. At the end, I'm going to kind of talk about sort of like going beyond like what to do with your film once you've made it. So we'll kind of hit on that then. But the chances of actually going back to film is it's very, very slight, and and it's also, no matter what you have and where you at, it's also a really, really expensive step.
But can we do that? Like, is there any problem with the audio at that time?
It's something that happens. It's not the easiest procedure, but yeah, you can definitely do it, and it's always easier to take away frames than to add frames. So yeah, it is a step and it's a render, but like that process is such a massive process anyway.
So then at that point, do you want to do 24? Do you want to do 24 so it's going to be converting to film later on, right?
Yes, yeah. So if your final output is going to be film, that is a good reason to work in 24 frames a second. And it's something that it comes up all the time. And like my only anecdote like for that is like, I don't know, like 15, 20 years of working like in filmmaking. I've only gone to, the only time I've actually gone like to film print is when we've actually shot film, and the chances of going to television and having someone go, we'd love to put this on TV, are way, way higher. And so that's typically why my default is like 2997p when I'm shooting video. It's a big debate that goes on about what looks better or what looks more film-like, and I tend to sort of shy away from. I'm not like a firm believer in 24 frames a second all the time, and that's, I don't know, it's not really controversial, but like a lot of people I think would disagree with me. But for me, the most important things is that it's a progressive frame. And that you have like a nicely composed shot, and that you are using the lenses in a depth of field. And when I used to shoot a lot of cars and car commercials, things like that, whenever you're dealing with fast motion, and you shoot in 24 and you end up going to television, you open yourself up to like a lot of stutter. And so that's my main personal reason in terms of dealing with it. But if you're shooting in terms of like a film like this, I don't think it's really going to make a whole lot of difference either way. And like I definitely wouldn't handicap yourself too much by worrying about like going to film or that possibility, and unless you're sure of it, because most of the time that's something that doesn't happen. So those are good questions. I think that we will we'll go to just sort of talk really specifically about this camera for a bit, and and I think that we can kind of go back to sort of what to do when you're at the end of your project, or at the end. One of the best things about this particular camera is how easy it is to get going, and I think that's probably common to a lot of cameras. And if you guys have been using the video features, but one of the things that is also kind of common is that it's often hard to lock and adjust the exposure setting on the camera, and kind of keeping a consistent exposure within a scene is one of the most important parts of filmmaking that you need to kind of keep in mind. Whereas like shooting stills, it's like you kind of go for the best exposure for every angle that you're looking at. Really, if you're cutting together shots, then they really, really need to make sure that you have something that's consistent throughout. Even if that means that the subject is darker in one shot and kind of comes into the light, like you just still have to sort of like kind of lock that in. And so the way that we did that with this particular camera is using the exposure lock and the exposure adjustment button on the back of the camera there's a little button with a star, and the reason for that is you can control the f-stop, but it would float the ASA to kind of like to make an exposure that worked, and particularly when you're shooting like dark scenes that you want to look dark, just like the actors just being like a little bit lit or backlit. You really sort of have to tell the camera that you want a different exposure than it wants to give you for the scene. The way that we did that in outside or more brightly lit shots is I would select the exposure for the camera, and typically it would be wide open, either like a 2.8 or a 3.5, and then point at a gray card that's in the light, and then use the star button on the back to lock the exposure in at that point. So that would like lock the ASA in, and then if I still needed to kind of bring the ASA down to kind of like get rid of essentially some gain, I would use the exposure adjustment and just dial down like 1 or 2 stops in that. And once I had that consistent look, every time I got a shot, I would just go to that gray card and repeat those steps. And after a while, it was something that was pretty quick. When we were working in like really low light situations, we also just found a trick is I would do the same thing, but by pointing it at one of the LED lights, just to dial that out. But it's just really important that you find an exposure that you like for the scene, and then go with that, even if people sort of need to, even if people aren't perfectly lit all the time. It's really a natural thing for people to kind of come in and out of the light. You just need to have that overall consistency. So that was sort of like a little workaround that we found with this camera, and it worked fine. And I know that with some other camera systems, it's sort of like a really similar thing. The other thing, I would say naturally it's about 320, 400 ASA on the camera without adding any gain. And we would shoot probably up to about 800 with like acceptable level of gain, in the blacks. So this is another one, adjusting the color temperature and the profiles for the camera. The color temperature is also something you really, really want to keep consistent as well, even perhaps more so than exposure. So I always lock it in, and sort of coming from a film background where we typically either have tungsten balanced film or daylight balanced film, I usually select just one or the other of those, and I only use a custom white balance if it's something in particular that we want to dial out, like in fluorescent lights. But typically, even in fluorescent lights, like if it looks a little green, I like it, if it kind of feels funky in those situations. So that's just a personal preference that I like, either using the daylight or the tungsten balance, and just sort of like letting like the green tints and stuff like kind of fall where they may. And that's something that if you look at the scenes that we did, which we essentially balanced mostly for daylight, and let like the orange lights in the background play really orange. There's a green spike in them. I think that really added to the ambiance. You may not like that, or you may want to just dial out the color temperature, but you definitely want to kind of keep that really consistent for the scene, like no matter what. Otherwise, it'll just, when you get to edit, it'll just feel like you're in 2 different places, and feel really, really choppy and really take the audience out of the moment. So that's I think I'd say a really important thing. The other thing is the profiles. This camera has a bunch of different look profiles. And there's 2 ways to think about dealing with the profiles in your camera. One, you create a look that you want on the day, whether that's highly saturated, or black and white, or something that's sort of in the middle. Like I think kind of contemporary film look is with some of the colors slightly desaturated and brought down. Like you can create all of these looks within the camera. But what we chose to do on this film is essentially do a very flat look, knowing that we were going to go back at the end of post-production and change it and sort of work the colors in sort of in the edit and color correction process. And if you have that ability to do that, I think that's the best way to kind of get that done, because you really can have a wide range to experiment with it after the fact. And so if that is something you're going to do, what we do is typically we call a raw look, and that just means that we dial back the contrast slightly and dial back the saturations just slightly, just so you kind of have like a really kind of like neutral starting place, so you can get kind of whichever look you want is something that you can achieve. I would say you don't want to dial the saturation back too much, but just slightly less than bright. So it looks a little bit duller perhaps than you would normally have it. But that gives you like a wide range to work with. Does anyone have any questions on that? I think these are an important step there. Yeah, go ahead. Pardon? No, it's different. Like the video functions of these cameras are like a little bit different. So none of them are shooting in like a true RAW. So that's why we sort of we take the look file and just sort of make it look a little bit more neutral. But when I say RAW it means that we are in many ways sort of copying the look of the RAW file. Now all video files, because they're compressed, you don't have quite the latitude of what you would in a digital still, but there's still quite a bit to work with there, and I think it's one of the more fun and satisfying parts of the process where you can really manipulate those images at the end. The more consistently you shoot them throughout the production, the easier it is to manipulate them at the end, because essentially one look can just be copied over that whole sequence. But those are two things. Just just to reiterate, because I think they are important. Making sure that you are locking in the color, temperature, and the exposure to really get that sense of consistency in the scene.
And you lock it in Kelvin?
Yes, there's a you can. There is one, and sometimes we like to put it in the middle, between the two. I don't like to mess with the green and magenta tints of things too much in the camera. That's something that I would rather do, in post, or let them play and let it feel like a real environment. But sometimes you can use the Kelvin to either warm up the shot or make it look a little bit cooler. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I stay away from the fluorescent mode typically, and use either the tungsten, the daylight, or just a straight Kelvin. Yeah, exactly. Cool. So we kind of went over the recording, and the recording thing I just have up here just because I wanted to make sure that we spoke about using the really quick cards, and also I think no matter if you have 30 minutes to record. In a shot doesn't mean you should use it all, because you have to go back and edit all this footage when you're finished with the project. And so really keeping takes nice and short is just gonna save you a lot, and even just sort of being really good about keeping track of which takes are good on set. It's something that it's very tempting just to be like, oh, it's just a memory card, it doesn't cost any money, just let it run. But really it's something you want to keep those takes as short and as distinct as possible. And that's just something I think that keeps the actors focused, and also just you're often the one that has to deal with this footage later. So kind of making sure that you're not giving yourself an unmanageable job at the end of it. Playing back, there are ways that you can monitor this camera, particularly for playback on a HDMI television, and it's a great way to sort of double check. Kind of what you're doing and look at the footage that you're getting. But typically what we do is, just because of the speed, I would just check on the back, and just really have to look carefully to make sure focus is good, and then I wouldn't check again until we downloaded this stuff onto the computer and then looked at it on my laptop. But you can play back from this to an HDMI television. It's just once you start getting in that world, all of a sudden you've got wires and stuff, and it really takes away from the sort of one of the best features I think of the camera, which is portability and ease of use. Cool. So some of these things, I think we sort of covered. We talked a lot about moving the camera. We didn't really talk about the film theory of why it's so compelling. And I think when I think of films, and my favorite films, is I think of something that really takes you on a journey, and kind of transports you to a different place. And I think why moving the camera is so compelling to me is it really allows you as a viewer to get into these different situations where you get a point of view which is so unique, and really the filmmaker gets to control. I think that, you know, as you sort of experiment with these cameras, like finding really interesting places where you can put the camera, which either has camera movement or movement comes to it, is going to be, you know, one of the most satisfying things you can get. I brought a few sort of like toys that we use on some of on the production that we could bring, and also sort of an example of a tripod. You know, getting a nice tripod is really important, you know, as you kind of like move on, and even if you're just like need to rent one for a day, but like using a still tripod when you try to do a smooth pan is just it's really difficult, and often something you're fighting against. This is a great tripod. It's not the cheapest, but I think we bought it ordered it from here, but it's a small Sackler tripod, and feel free at the end just to kind of, you know, get a feel of it. If you're doing something really narrative and you don't have a tripod, I would recommend renting one. It's definitely something that you know, working with sort of the wrong tools can really just like affect the film. And then behind it, I don't know if you guys can see, but that's kind of a new piece of equipment that's become really popular, and it's a slider dolly, and that allows you just you know, use a tabletop, it becomes a dolly. They're like available everywhere. People are even making them like with a homemade, and it's something that just that brings like that little bit of motion in a shot. I think just really adds. And you know, whether you're moving to bring attention to something or going from one object to another, it's really, you know, it's part of the magic of filmmaking. We use a lot of handheld rigs, and I would say that if you're doing a lot of handheld, it's fine to use the camera. But if you're moving it a lot around, it's like even like a homemade brace, something where you can just put the camera on your shoulder, and just have a little bit of extra stability, is something that's really important. I didn't bring the one that we used on Uncle Jack, because we were using it on another project, but I mean, it is really like a pretty janky piece of equipment. I mean, almost homemade, and something that I think that, you know, even if you have to kind of make yourself, you know, it's something that you can. It's really definitely, you know, sort of up to you and your creativity to think of like really interesting places where you can put it, and you know, kind of come up with your own things. One of the other favorite shots we had, I love about the small size of it, is just the shots we got in the beginning where we actually just drove over the camera, and you know, it's one of like the coolest things that you can do. So so you guys have any other questions on sort of camera movement? I just want to go over this quickly because I think we covered a lot of it previously. We just put the camera on the ground. Yeah, that's it. Oh, driving. The shot in the beginning, yeah, we just like, you just put it on the ground and like press record and then like run away. I mean, like literally, and then you're like, please don't hit the camera, please don't hit the camera. But I mean, it wasn't that bad. Luckily, we got that in a few shots. There was a couple actually. We had this really small like suction cup kit. And we got some shots like of the tire skidding, and we were able just to stick with like just a big rubber pod onto the side of the car and go. And then those are things that they're like either homemade or you can order. And like literally, like if you don't have that, just get more tape. Just tape it somewhere. Yeah.
You haven't talked about focus pulling on this.
I haven't, but we have a whole section. No, it's a great one. And so I have a whole section on focus, and the reason is because, you know, focus can be like really tricky. And I kind of alluded before, but when I first started in the film business, I was a camera assistant on films and commercials and stuff like that. And in my job, eventually, you get to the point where you're the focus puller. And you know, on major, you know, motion pictures or even most productions, there's a person whose job is entirely you know, set around focus. And it is one of the trickier things. See, trickier with motion. But you know, I think the important thing to remember is it's still an artistic choice. You know, as much as it is like this, you know, sort of process of keeping it in, you know, keeping everything in focus. It's not so much about keeping everything in focus as much about where you want as a filmmaker to focus people's eyes. And you know, that doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, carrying someone into the frame. With these style cameras, and really even, I would say not just these style cameras, but working with like a small crew, if you can find a way to really make your shots like, not have to be about, sort of holding focus on someone as they walk through a room, but either, shooting that in a wide way or letting people kind of come in and out of focus as part of that artistic choice. I think, one, it's going to make your shots more interesting because you've been forced to think and kind of take it in another direction. But it's also, gonna sort of, take you away from like working in a technical way that's maybe not necessary. All across the board, all still camera lenses are not designed with the follow focusing in mind. And there's lots of adapters that can help you, but really, like, they're never going to take it to the point of where like a film lens is with the big barrels. They're like just designed specifically for that, and that's one of the reasons why they're so much more expensive. And by more expensive, I mean they're like 10 to 100 times more expensive. But it's something which I think, as I mentioned, it doesn't have to be a limitation. It can also like make you think. And I think that I really like the shot with someone out of focus in the long lens as they walk in and hit their mark into focus. So I think one of those things I think is a cool trick or something to do is set your focus on a position where someone's going to either come into or go out of, and just before you shoot the shot, just get that focus mark and hold it there. I think is a really, really kind of cool way to do that. Also, I mean, it is really possible to rack between two objects on these things. And what I like to do with that is just get a piece of tape and wrap it around the lens, and then just like I did on the film set, you make just 2 marks. Or if you're more advanced, you can also make the tape so if you're doing the operating yourself, you just pull it and it'll stop. You can see I'm a big fan of tape. It is it is one of the most things. And follow focusing is something you also kind of do that way. If you absolutely have to do a follow focus, for the shot, then I think the best way to do it is to set it up just like you would on a film set, and have someone like walk through the shot slowly, and you get a mark at the beginning, and you get a mark in the middle, and you get a mark at the end, and then you make those marks on a piece of tape on the side of the lens, and then when they do them, hopefully you have someone who can help you while you operate the camera, just moving that very, it's a very subtle touch. It's something that takes a little bit of practice, and I think it's one of those things too that if you go in knowing that it's like complicated and you can't just show up and just be able to follow someone from walking to the lens or walking away from you like right off the bat, then you can sort of design your shots to make it a little bit simpler and to make it really, really count. But it is one of the most difficult things about working with these cameras. We love this shallow depth of field for the way that it looks, but now you have to deal with it as a filmmaker. So every shot we did in this film was double checking the focus. In low light, another trick that I like to use is you take a mag light and you unscrew the top, and then you hold that like right by someone's eyes if you need to focus in like the low light when it's sort of like hard to see. Your eyes are tired, and it's an easy point to focus on, and it also like helps illuminate their eyes, so you can sort of focus on both their eyes and the point of the mag light. But the thing that you need to pay attention to the most, I think, as you're shooting is making sure that your focus is set before every shot, and then as you're shooting like a series of shots, often actors will move. One of the things I learned that when you're working with actors is that you're asking for the range of motion before the shot, and 9 times out of 10, whenever they do this shot, actually when you're doing that, when you call action, is they'll always come closer to the camera because they're just like a little bit excited. So you kind of have to be prepared for that, and you kind of like learn how your actors go. It is one of the more challenging things, I think, though. Keep it simple when you're starting out, particularly if you're working just with your camera by yourself, and have fun with it. Like let things be out of focus and come into focus. As long as something is in focus in the frame or going to come into focus, it'll always feel like you did that intentionally, I think. Yes, sir.
Yeah, on set, did you use an external monitor just to check the focus?
We didn't. Yeah, we used in camera, and we would just use like like a trick, like just putting a flashlight up.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just one of those things. It's like once you start adding all these features to it, things. It just becomes you lose like the flexibility of being able to move quickly. And so, you know, focus will always be a struggle. And, you know, a lot of it was shot with wide lenses too, just from stylistically, and that helped. But really, you know, it was sort of like our game, was to keep the camera stripped down as simple as possible, and either use like a light to focus, or just, you know, there's like you can punch in a little bit and just sort of like double check that way too. It's just really about just taking the time and being conscious of it.
When you talk
Yes.
about portability, right?
Portability?
Yeah.
Yes.
How you feel about using all these kind of accessories for these cameras, like a chase and so forth, and any special place? How you feel about that?
Which kind of accessories?
All those plates that you put out in tripod, and all these kind of slides, kind of things that they make, you know.
Yeah.
It made the operation more complex.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely like my opinion on this. The question is, like, you know, there's all these accessories coming out for the DSLRs. You know, for me, I think the biggest one is a good tripod. That's the most important one. You know, I think there's a bunch of accessories and stuff that come. Some of them are you know, good. In many ways, some of them, they're all good. They all help you in some ways. But like, I kind of think that, you know, all of a sudden you have like a camera that was very affordable and very portable, and now you have, like, you know, you spent 3 times as much on your accessories, and it's sort of like now it's like weighs twice as much. All of those things, you know, I think you have to keep in mind. And for me, like, you know, the best thing about it was, like, you know, the size, you know, where we could put it, you know, how we could like rig it in certain ways. So that was more important, and we really didn't have any of the cages or matte boxes or like things like that for it. So that worked for me. You'll kind of have to find your own style, but I do think it's just more important to keep your you know, mind on being creative and having fun with it, and the fact that it really doesn't have any limits, and that you can, you know, you can really just like start with a filmmaker like right away with it and not worry too much about the accessories. Except a nice tripod is really nice. Yeah, sure, cool. Are there any other questions on focus? I know it's sort of something I think really you kind of have to experiment with a little bit.
Did you ever find yourself, because of a tight, small, wherever circumstance, just trying the automatic focus?
We didn't do that. Like, if I would, when you're putting the cameras in those places, often or not, it's a wide. There was a few times where we would, you know, I'm going like this because I'm really thinking about the shots where we had it on the floor of the car. It was really, really difficult to see what was going on. And in that case, I would sometimes just use like the feet, you know, the counter on the lens to get. And I'm pretty good, you know, just sort of like knowing where to focus like a wide lens. And then the other thing too is you can always just review your footage right there. And it's not like you've spent like, you know, like a roll of film. It's just digital. So sometimes it's better just to give it a try, and if it didn't work, you just kind of like make some adjustments and do it again. Cool.
How did you like that shot with the camera on the
Literally, like, it was, and I think these are, I'm pointing to this, but like the small handheld ones, which are really like are pretty affordable, or handheld, the ones that fit in like the hot shoe of the camera. Like, and they're made by light panels too. They are, you know, one of the most useful lights I've seen. And I would say almost every single shot in this film had at least one of them in it. And we would just put that camera there, and then just in the edges of the frame, just tape them. Sometimes put some diffusion on them, or to cover up part of them with some tape, just to kind of shape the light. But really, it was just a great light because it was never so overpowering that it felt lit. And if you got too close to someone, you can just dial it down. And it was really easy to put some gel on to change the color temperature. Another great shot, another shot I really enjoyed shooting was when they're in the tunnel and he has the lighter. And for that, like, I just literally took, again, one of those lights, and I just wrapped it with some orange gel and just held it just out of frame, and just you know, just flickered it off and on. As you turn on the lighter, I turned it on. And that's how we got that shot, you know. So again, I would have maybe just made it a little bit less bright, but you know, I think it worked.
I noticed also that the camera lens is situated different than on a regular video camera.
Right.
And on a video camera, it's I'm sorry, is this thing right? You know, on a video camera, you have a long body and the lens here. You can't lay it on your back like you can.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's. I mean, it's just like that size, and I think when we're looking at putting the camera either on the floor or like actually on the dash, it's places where you would not be able to get like a video camera, and it's thing. I mean, the gentleman was talking about comparing it to like big motion picture cameras, and you're always gonna, it's. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I think that's not a really good observation. I think that's the thing is like you want to be playful with these cameras. You want to put them in fun places. You want to make that like fun and enjoyable, and that's exactly how it should be. You had a question?
Just go back to focus. When you hit the camera on the dashboard or by the wheel, do you ever experience the focal length changing because everything is moving and you're able to lock the focal length?
Once again, it's like, yeah, if it came down to like being in a really bumpy situation, like I would literally just use tape.
So within the camera, you cannot lock the focal length. You can lock exposure or whatever, but not the focal length.
I mean, all zoom lenses, they're adjusted like on the barrel, yeah. So I've never really seen a zoom lens that is locked in that way. Even on like the film cameras, like sometimes in the same situation, we would handle it exactly the same way. Just whenever you're like away from the camera and there's a chance of it like getting bumped around, just like secure it with a small piece of tape, and you're sort of good to go. The exposure obviously is you're able to lock in the camera, but the focal length on the zoom like is something that you got to be careful of.
You're using so much tape.
Yes.
A product that takes the gum off the camera and you're done.
This camera, the titanium body. No, the tape that we use is just gaff tape, and as long as you kind of like take it on and off within like a day or two, it comes off pretty clean. Cool. So we're just going to go through, and some of these that we kind of covered earlier on because I think we had some really good questions in there, but I can just kind of cover that. The first thing I'll say is that I talked a lot about Final Cut and compressor and things that are sort of Apple products. They all do about the same thing. All the editing softwares, whether you're using it like Adobe Premiere, like whatever you're using, everyone has their preferences, and like I definitely have my preference, but really, I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. Essentially, most films are just about the decisions that you make in the cuts. And every program from the very most basic like iMovie will handle that. So, I think you shouldn't get hung up on, what software you have or you don't have, and really just kind of like, get stuck into to making the film. I will, just like going from high def AVI, which is what this camera shoots, and just reiterate, like it's really, really important to change that codec, which, codec is the fancy term for whatever the file type is. To something that works well for your editing software, and whatever editing software you have should have like something that in sort of the same realm as ProRes, which is like the Apple standard. And the last thing is just really when you are shooting, like that organization, it's the most important thing. And I think that as you kind of start to make films, or as you are making films, you'll kind of like learn that like along the way. But I will say that the more you can do and the less you can shoot in the beginning, and be really efficient with that, the quicker that process will go, and the more fun you'll have, and the less just sort of like kind of slogging through it. Cool. I know we covered a lot of this in the beginning. Is there any other questions on editing and moving through that? Good. You guys are all pros. I like it. Cool. So sharing your film with an audience, and this is, when I was talking about digital filmmaking and how far it's come. It's really every different aspect is where it's hit, from like being able to edit, doing your own special effects, to shooting with these small cameras, to I think the last thing, which is how do you share your film with an audience? And there's so many ways now that you can do that. And this was a film that we knew from the start we wanted to share primarily through social media, you know, so it went up on several YouTube sites, went on the Pentaxian site, went up on Futuristic Films, which is my company's site, went up on Jamin's site. We kind of put it out in a bunch of different ways, and you know, it's like between all of them, just in all the YouTubes, it's well over, you know, 100,000 hits is what, and then that's not counting the Vimeo pages, all of that. So it's something I think is really exciting to do. So there's a bunch of different ways. There's social media. Festivals now are accepting films. They love film shot on DSLRs, you know, and they're definitely anxious. You know, you don't have to have a film print like we were talking about before. It just like an HD file is good, and DVDs. So just I want to talk a little bit about like kind of, you know, how you organize that, particularly when we talk about social media and either Vimeo or YouTube. This camera shoots 720p, which I think is the perfect size for dealing with over the internet. It definitely, like, we watch it in 720 on the full screen, and I think, you know, it scales up very well. And once you get over 720, it just the upload times and the times for people, you know, it takes a download, it's just way too long. And I think if you ever go to like a site and you want to see an HD video and it takes more than, you know, 5 to 10 minutes, most people are just like on to the next one. So the first thing you want to do is like have the very high res, whether it's ProRes or whatever codec, like your master file. You want to have that, and that's what you will kind of keep and have as like the best quality. And from that, you'll want to compress to bring it out on you know, onto social media networks. We use what's called the H.264 codec, which is, I think, like the best for like download speeds that you can get for how it looks. And so we compress for Vimeo or YouTube, we compress 720p with the H.264 codec around 4,000 kilobits a second. And that's just sort of our specs. And most of those sites have their own specs that sort of like to upload. And you sort of use the Vimeo kind of HD one is our one. But my advice is, one is you want to have your master file as high as res as possible, but don't upload that one for everyone, because no one will watch it because it'll just take far too long. So you want to kind of create like as small a file as you feel looks good and is acceptable to you. And I would definitely suggest the 720 with the H.264, you know, around like 4,000, maybe even like 3,000 kilobits a second. And then, you know, send it up to Vimeo. I think it looks really good, but YouTube for some reason seems to get way more hits. And then, you know, send it out to as many people as you can. And I think it's really kind of cool. We sort of just like, you know, sent out this one, and people watched it all over the world. Someone uploaded Uncle Jack with Hungarian subtitles. So it was a hit in Hungary. You know, and so it's really just amazing to see like where all those things go. And it's also, you know, from any of those programs you can you know, make DVDs, and DVDs are typically what like festivals want for submissions. But I think the best way to share it is to get it up on a Vimeo page or a YouTube page or both, and just sort of see where it goes. You know, send it out to your friends, let everyone know, and yeah, you never know. It's these things, like, they circle the world, and they seem to have a life of their own, and particularly like this film. Cool. So we have Carolyn here who has some Pentax equipment. If you guys want to take a look at the end of the show. But if you guys sort of have any more questions or anything you want to ask we didn't cover along the way, I'd feel free to hit me up. Yes, sir.
Did you do the film first before you hooked up with Pentax?
I'd worked with Pentax, like I mentioned before, like shooting some photographer profiles. I don't know, it was like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and that was, I mean, you know, I'm going to say it again. It was like two different worlds at that point. Like, and I never imagined that it would go in this direction, where like the photographers and the DSLR users and the filmmakers would become together. But that was our first time that we worked with Pentax. Their Pentax USA is based in Golden, Colorado. And when they kind of came out with the K-7 and the video features, through that they were asking some filmmakers just to kind of like go, hey, you guys want to shoot a film? You know, like, why don't you try our equipment? And so they kind of came to us with the K-7 and said, you know, they give it a whirl. and they were open to kind of whatever we suggested, and so Uncle Jack was the film that we wanted to do, and that's sort of that's how that happened. It was a great relationship with the company. They just really, I think, they wanted just to see what would, what a filmmaker would do, how it would kind of go through that, sort of that aspect. Like still photographers had used them to kind of, thinking about it in that way, and like a lot of like outdoor like naturescapes, but they hadn't used it in a strictly storytelling way because the camera was so new. So yeah, it was really kind of because of them and their support that we were able to do the film. Yes.
How did you do color correction?
We did it with Final Cut mostly. Some of it was done in After Effects when there's 2 layers, but typically it was done in Final Cut. And Final Cut has a pretty simple, straightforward way of doing color correction, where you just, it's if you use Final Cut, it's just a 3-way color corrector, which is a filter. And the way we do it is we try to shoot very, very consistently throughout. And then if there's some inconsistencies in the shots, I go through to correct the shots so everything looks consistent. And then with another layer of color correction, I will create a look, and then just paste that look across the sequence to kind of get it. And like this was very much like a considered look that Jamin wanted, the kind of like the blue sort of like night look that we went for, kind of muted colors in the store at the end. It was something that was very much like an artistic choice that he wanted, and we achieved that way. We've also used the color corrector program Color, which is a really strong program, but it's definitely a lot more like kind of complicated and time consuming to use. And what we were able to do with Final Cut was really worked well. Yes, sir. Or ma'am, sorry. Sorry, I was looking at this gentleman out of the corner of my eye.
What's the differences between the K7 and the KX, and what's the range on the glass that you're using?
The lenses are interchangeable, and Carolyn can answer like those questions pretty specifically. But the video features are not that different.
No, the videos.
We have another expert too. I love it. You got the KX.
Yeah, I think right after we're done with the presentation, we can go over the cameras and the differences.
We have a K7 and a KX up here.
Yeah, we have the K7 and the KX and quite a few different lenses. The lenses that were used for the making of Uncle Jack, as well as some other lenses to check out.
Cool.
I missed the beginning. Did you use two cameras at the same time, and also you have is there a way to turn off automatic?
There was the first question is no. We only use one camera at a time, and typically like I like just to use one camera at a time, particularly on something like this, where every shot you're sort of like you have your lights just like creeping in to the edges of the frame, and very often I find it when you're shooting 2 cameras at once, it just becomes more of a it slows you down more than you think it would speed you up. Does that make sense? You think it's going to speed you up because you're shooting 2 angles at once, but it really just because you have to compromise the lighting of one for the other. So I prefer to shoot one camera at a time. I use 2 cameras at a time for interviews and sort of like like live style coverage. But if we're shooting like a narrative film, like for me in essence, like some sort of stunt sequence and these stunts were all mostly effects. So like it's just best for me just like one camera at a time, focus on that shot individually, and I think it's a better way unless you absolutely like need 2 cameras. And then we did go over the gain control thing, and I can actually show you that how I did that. It's sort of a little trick you use to lock the exposure at a certain way, and then it doesn't have like gain per se. But what it does is it's a floating ISO. So there's a way that we lock the ISO, and then if there's a little too much gain and I want to bring it down, I use the auto or the exposure compensation to dial that out. For audio. I'm sorry. So with the audio, we recorded mostly on a second system, and yeah, like that mic. It works well kind of with the auto gain. All of these cameras, because the mic plugs are so small, there's a few ways where they sort of, like, I've seen you can sort of like trick the camera to shutting off the auto gain, but really, you know, if you're recording like dialogue, like film style, the best way to do it is with a separate system. And the one I like is actually, it's M Audio. Makes one. It's just like a few $100 or like $150, and it's just a solid state recorder that records to a compact flash. And it's it feels a little bit tricky to use, but it's really just because it's so simple, and it's really an amazing piece of equipment. Everyone's making stuff for DSLR now, and it's awesome. It's really good. But like even for the Steadicam, it's like honestly just like if you counterweight a monopod, if you make the monopod like as small as possible and like, I don't know, tape something to it, or whatever. but just put a counterweight on it, you can get really, really great shots that way. And the Steadicams are cool, but you know, even with the Steadicam, you get some like rocking back and forth, and just using it, what we call it, like the forearm killer basically. But you can get really good shots that way, just with a counterbalance. Yeah, I can show. I think if they don't kick us out, we'll show it. Or yeah, so you can watch it online. We're trying to get more hits. If you just Google Uncle Jack Pentax, it'll show up on both like the YouTube link and the Vimeo link. Is there a link? There's a link on there too. Great. Oh, you want to see the projector? Yeah, it is nice. They have nice projectors here. I don't know why. The audio for this, we actually we used a boom for the whole production, but we only use it for reference audio, except for Little Girl. Actually, we kept her audio in because it was such a quiet room. But with all the running and jumping and different scenes, we cut it together with the reference audio, and then we brought the actors back, and we just recorded it in a quiet room, like a basement room at the director's house one day. Yeah, it takes a little bit of time, but you know, it's one of those things where it used to have a big booth, but we would just play. We'd play it once on the computer for everyone to like listen to, and then just go through a few takes. And like after a while, like, you know, he really got the hang of it, and I think did a great job. We'd found her in a casting session for another project, and like she hadn't been quite right for it the first time around, and then she worked with Jamin on a film. There's just one of those like yeah, one of those talents you just like remember. You're like, we're gonna find something like for it, and I think really he had her in mind when he wrote this, when he was writing the script. Yeah, when she came out too, like we didn't know that she got braces. We're like, oh no, she's got braces. But then of course it's just even cuter. No, these are all like just they're local Denver actors. One of them is like, since now he's moved to LA, but you know, even in Denver. So if we can find people like this in Denver, you guys should have no trouble finding great talent for your films. No, they didn't get paid. No one really got paid except for the stunt, like some of the stunt guys and for the lighting and the stage. Everyone did it for the love. Yes, sir.
Can you talk for a second about how working with this camera when you're doing the green screen?
Yes.
Because you sort of touched on it briefly, but compared to other cameras that you use, in other words, configuring it so you got a clean green screen and level set.
Yeah,
how difficult was it?
It wasn't as difficult as we thought. You know, it was one of the things we were kind of most concerned about, I think, you know, when we did it, and particularly as we started going through the script and realizing that we needed to do green screen on the car chase sequence. Really, it's just about like, you know, making sure that you get, you know, a really good amount of separation of light on the green screen, and then it was also one of the reasons why we up-resed for the effect shots and eventually for the whole film. To 1080 was just to get a little bit more control on those. But really, like, it's a combination of whoever's doing like the key, and if you're ever working a key in Final Cut, it's really difficult, or most of the editing softwares. But if you can do it in a program like After Effects, then your control is just so much better. And that's really the key. It wasn't even really the camera as much as like as the skill in using that program as opposed to like an editing program to do it. Even using you know, like really clean like HD cameras, you know, on other projects, when you try to do it in like a program like Final Cut, you never get results that you like, particularly around the edges. But After Effects is, in like a little bit of practice, you're able to get it kind of like with whatever camera. So yeah, it's a fun part of production, but like it definitely takes a little bit of time to kind of time and experimenting to kind of get that going. Cool. Do you guys want to come up and take a look at the cameras? And maybe if you have a little bit of time, we can play the movie again. If not, we'll have to go to Vimeo. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciated you guys and your questions.